Hello. Welcome to another CWTA virtual event. I'm Robert Giz, President and CEO of the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association. This is our second event of our virtual series called 5G Canada, What's Next? This series gives us a chance to look at trends and innovations in specific sectors and the role 5G will play into the future. Cette série nous donnera la chance d'examiner les tendances et l'innovation de plusieurs secteurs et quel rôle jouera les réseaux 5G dans le futur. Past studies sponsored by CWTA have looked at the economic impact that 5G will play in Canada and the benefits it will bring to cities and rural communities. We have also looked at the impact that 5G will have on reducing Canada's carbon footprint. All of these reports can be found on our cwta.ca and 5gcc.ca websites. Based on these reports, we know that through the adoption of 5G, approximately 250,000 full-time jobs will be added to the Canadian economy by 2026. It is also estimated, according to Accenture, that by 2026, we'll see an incremental increase of $40 billion to our GDP. It's estimated that between 2020 and 26, that $26 billion will be spent in deploying 5G infrastructure in Canada. And most of these investments will be made by Canada's facilities-based operators. We also have learned through our look at how 5G will affect climate change that with the implementation of 5G, mobile technologies will have the potential to account for up to 23% of Canada's current emission reduction targets by the year 2025. These numbers, I believe, provide Canada with a great opportunity. We have often illustrated how 5G will be a catalyst for economic growth in Canada. But today we will look at 5G from the home digital lifestyle perspective. Specifically, we will discuss the impacts of 5G on the way we live and how to bring Canadians a higher quality of life. We're fortunate to have great speakers with us today. I'm pleased to introduce Eric Bruno, Senior Vice President, 5G Content and Connected Home at Rogers Communications, and Jefferson Wang, Global 5G Strategy and Go-to-Market Lead at Accenture, also the co-author of the book, The Future Home in the 5G Era. So thanks for being here today. I hope you enjoy today's discussion. And now I'll turn it over to CWTA Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Eric Smith, who will moderate today's discussion. Eric.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the second in our 5G series. And I know that some of you were with us the first time, and we have some newcomers today. When we were putting together our 5G series, the goal was to look at how 5G would impact different vertical industries and elements of society. We want to spark people's imagination and help them visualize and understand how 5G will change the way that we work, live, and play. As Rob mentioned, today's topic largely revolves around the home and really what is meant by a connected or smart home in the 5G era. Some people say that mobile wireless isn't really going to play a big role in the home, that fixed broadband and Wi-Fi will continue to dominate home connectivity. And a lot of commentators also say 5G is not really about consumers, that it's really more of an enterprise or B2B play. Some of the arguments made are that there's no real use cases that are relevant to consumers, and that 4G is sufficient for most consumers' needs, that smartphones are the only consumer solution for 5G, and that current usage patterns like restricting high data usage to fixed broadband in the home will continue in the 5G era. Our speakers today are going to challenge some of these myths and take a closer look at how 5G will enable a more seamless user experience across devices, services, and locations. As Rob mentioned, joining us today is Jefferson Wang of Accenture. Rob mentioned that Jefferson, along with some of his colleagues at Accenture, published a book in 2020. Got a copy right here called The Future Home in the 5G Era. Highly recommend the book. While it gives an optimistic view of how 5G can improve our lives, it also provides a real clear-eyed perspective, I think, on some of the challenges to realizing the full benefits of 5G. And if you're interested in getting a copy of the book, you can find it on Amazon. I've asked Jefferson to give us a brief overview, a reminder of the key attributes of 5G, and also explain what he means by the 5G future home. And as Jefferson will point out, the role of communication service providers, or CSPs, is an important one in delivering a 5G user experience that will evolve beyond just providing connectivity. And so who better to join us to discuss the role of CSPs but Eric Bruno from Rogers Communications. So just before I turn it over to Jefferson, I'd like to remind our audience that if they have questions, they can type their question out using the Q&A or chat or ask function, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the limited time we have. So now I'd just like to turn over to Jefferson from Accenture.
Hey, everybody. First off, thank you to CWTA and thank you to Robert and Eric for having myself and Eric Bruno. We're excited to be here. Just a couple things, as Eric had mentioned, wanted to kind of start with a little bit about the history of 5G and why it's really interesting to break some of those myths that we talked about at the beginning. As Eric had mentioned, is there an opportunity to converge fixed and wireline in 5G? Are there use cases for the consumer market? And are there opportunities to think about a position for the communication service providers? So just very quickly, if we look at kind of the history of wireless, 1G, obviously we had mobile voice, 2G, we added text. When I was building feature phones, we used to call them TNT devices, right? Talking text devices. In 3G, we unlocked mobile data. And then in 4G, where we're now staring at the rectangular slabs in our palms, that unlocked the mobile internet. And now as we move to the 5th generation of wireless, I think some of the comments that we talked about at the beginning, which are important to notice, is that you generally retire your previous generations to free up resources, free up spectrum to put to future generations. And around the world, you're starting to see more and more 2G networks starting to sunset. For example, in the US, 3G is going to be sunset in 2022, and you'll start to see more of those resources put towards 5G. So when you look at kind of the definition of this, it's really a when versus an if situation with 5G. I think the other interesting thing about this is that we have the opportunity to kind of converge for the first time the wireless network with some of the fixed operations. And that allows some of those convergence opportunities that we want to talk about today. And if you notice, the companies that have migrated past each of these generations, you'll see some of the actual logos drop off. And is that the interesting opportunity in 5G? We've left it blank because that is the chance, the promise to kind of disrupt these value chains or actually come into parts of these value chains differently. So then if you think about why the topic of home, typically that's not necessarily a wireless conversation other than things like if there's a redundancy issue or you need to have like a backup situation, wireless comes in. But what we're noticing now is, we wrote the book prior to the pandemic, and actually the pandemic validated and accelerated all the trends that we had talked about. So if you look at how important the home is from a data perspective, now it's one of the main pots of data. It's not just your mobile device and your work, but now your home is becoming an incredibly important area or a data gold mine. And if now you look at some of these key trends around working from home more than ever now, and this will continue on in a hybrid environment after the pandemic. So we did a survey recently and found that 53% of the folks who had never had the opportunity to work from home before now actually want that opportunity going forward, even post-pandemic. Virtual health, we found that in these times of crisis that we actually weren't able to go see primary care physicians or specialists. Some people, millions of people, were immune compromised and could not get there. So the value chain had to change. The insurance providers had to start to offer the payments for virtual care, and the actual providers had to actually provide different ways for digital and virtual healthcare. So that changed that value chain. Will that continue on as we come out of this? Even immersive communications, there's this situation where a lot of people actually are living by themselves and they're isolated. And can we find new ways to create more immersive communications? Can we go beyond just the video call? So several consumer-based use cases that are really 5G dependent. If you think about anything with video requires a bigger pipe to deliver that. Anything that has interaction, like a virtual healthcare solution where you need a more responsive network, a lower latency network. How do you think about the sensors that today, a lot of times we didn't have them all connected to actually a cellular network, and we'll tell you why, versus they're all connected to Wi-Fi now, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of that? So that leads to some of these newer business models that we talked about, and it's really going from the megabyte business model in a 4G world, where we measured on a bucket of megabytes, to really a multi-sided platform business model. And we'll kind of walk into what does that really mean. So next, if we just look at the market opportunity without connectivity, just not even counting kind of the connection to the home, it's a very large market. By 2025, about $183 billion revenue opportunity broken up between kind of the hardware versus the service. So if you add connectivity, this is an even bigger opportunity to think through. And then this requires kind of new muscles to be trained because the home market is actually being entered by many opportunity areas. So for example, there's the equipment providers that are actually trying to work through the sensors and figure out how to enter into the home and lifestyle space. There is the internet providers that have their smart speakers and they have their AIs tied to it, and they have their digital concierge service tied to it. There is the communication service providers coming in from a connectivity perspective and trying to build off of it, all of them trying to win the hearts and minds of the consumer. So then if we think about the connectivity service provider specifically, there's a lot of control points to really highlight. And when we think about a control point, it's something to actually take advantage of and figure out how to drive a value chain position in. There's certainly the retail presence. Anytime we move to a new generation of technology, there's new experiences, new devices, they require education. It requires conditioning of the market. Is that retail opportunity? Is that a chance for a CSPs to take advantage of that? There's certainly the actual devices in the home from a connectivity perspective. There's of course the modem and the router and gateway that's going into the home. There's the set-top box. If some communication service providers are offering video, that's another piece of equipment to take advantage of. There's certainly the actual SIM card relationship itself from the mobile and actually bringing that and converging that account into the home as well. And then there's things like customer care. And those are all some of the key control points in the dark purple at the bottom that you see that can be opportunities for communication service providers to take advantage of to get into the home. So then we talked a little bit about what does a new business model look like. And if you look like the word of platform, there's different opportunities to think about how to look at a platform. This is one way to think about it, but a business model where it's multi-sided. You've got your CSP could potentially in the middle, where they're actually the, call it team captain, and their responsibility can be to attract the best players and figure out who are the best partners, who are the best developers, who are the best solution providers to attract to their team, and then who are the right customers they should connect their actual solutions and partners to. And then you've created kind of this multi-sided platform. And then how does the communication service provider extend some of their capabilities to both sides? For example, to the partner side, do they extend a billing system relationship where potentially there's a really good startup that has a great solution, but they don't have a billing system or a billing relationship with the customer? Can they actually open up direct carrier billing and allow that startup to do what they do best, more products, more customer experience focused, but not have to worry about the billing? When you look at maybe a large partner, could they extend their customer care to, so that they don't have to think about having another customer care touch point, that it's really one accountable party, and be able to extend that? And then on the right to the customers, how does the CSP make sure that they're providing the most relevant services and toasting them up to the consumer? For example, let's look at a small apartment in a very urban city that may only have one door. Offering an entire home security package or home automation security package to that apartment and that customer may not be needed. There's only one entry point, and there's potentially a security gate down at the bottom. What are the other solutions to really think about personalizing versus offering customer with home security? So there's kind of purposes on both sides. And then when we look at the roadmap to be able to get to the home, we talk a lot about the stages of the journey. And the first stage is, of course, from a CSP perspective, is that connectivity to the home. How do you potentially think about differentiating this convergence play of people in a mobile environment and moving into the home and making sure that's seamless? How do you potentially drive out more of a customer experience that's more frictionless? How do you actually differentiate on care and drive out that number one to the left? Then number two in the middle is, right now, a lot of these devices not only want to converge between the set-top box, the home speaker, and the gateway, but a lot of times they don't have a user interface. For example, from a router perspective, you may just pick it up, look at the SSID, and then type in the password, but there's no real way to interact with it. There's no way to turn it into a platform. So we call it really enhancing that connectivity, which is building that front end to some of these devices so that you can turn it into a solution platform to be able to deliver different services to the customer, but building that front end to that connectivity and adding things like making device pairing easier, adding things like device actual troubleshooting that could be devices that you sell, or it could even be third parties. So for example, from a communication service perspective, if they can actually determine that the actual fiber or the backhaul is working, the router is working correctly, the Wi-Fi is reaching the device, then they could potentially confidently say that device you're having trouble with, that third-party device, it actually is the device. We've checked out the entire chain of communications and everything's agreeing, and that's a value to the customer. Now that gives you the right to play and the right to win in potentially stage 3, which is now how do you move more from connecting to the home, adding enhancements in the home, now potentially trying to own the home and moving into those new experiences we talked about at the beginning. What does a more immersive gaming experience look like? What does a more intense or immersive communications solution look like? How do we think about virtual healthcare and unlocking those benefits? So that's kind of the staged approach that we've been working with clients on globally. So last 2 slides, really just wanted to show you what the actual current state is and what is a quote unquote smart home versus what a future state could be for this future home environment. If you look at the top row, you actually have to read the labels of these devices and figure out, is this a Amazon compatible device or a Google Home compatible device? Do we actually have to think about Wi-Fi versus a gateway like Zigbee and Z-Wave? We found that a lot of that is on the user. You have to almost, we call it being your own CTO of your own home. You have to really figure all that stuff out. Then you buy a device and you make a decision, and now you have to download an app. We all understand app fatigue, but now you have to download another app and type in your Wi-Fi password, for example. And that could be 16 digits, alphanumeric, complex, capitals, symbols, and all that. We found that, a lot of times these setups for the current home can take almost 2.5 hours. So that becomes a friction point to mass adoption. And then after that, what if the power goes out? What if your device doesn't come back online? Now you have to actually, reconfigure it. Then you have to actually connect that device, that home CTO scenario we talked about, to all the other devices in the home. So again, that's a lot of work in the top row of the current state. In the future state, if we can move things more to 5G, you think about it like your smartphone. You make a purchase and it's curated, so it's going to work with what you have. You take the device out, you don't download an app, you turn on the power, and the network, the BSS and the OSS handles the activation, it handles the provisioning. You literally just hit power and the device registers on the network, it actually registers and gets the services and it's provisioned correctly, and then it self-organizes. So it moves from a 6-stage complex scenario in the current state to just 3 easy steps. So is that the opportunity when we think about this future home environment, if we move devices off and onto a 5G scenario? And then last but not least, what are some of the use cases that can change the lives of our consumers? The current state is if you wake up, you have to look out your window, but you have to ask the actual smart speaker what the weather is. You have to make a request to the assistant and ask the digital assistant what your schedule looks like. When you actually try and actually go to work, and if there's an issue with your commute, you have to do your own redirection. You have to do your own on-the-fly decisions on how to change modes of transportation. And then finally, when you're actually walking home from work, you very much are limited to a voice call, a text, or a video call. But in the future, can we make that more automated? Can we make that more predictive? Can we make that more seamless? So when you wake up and you look out the window, it should know it's you. It should know that you're looking out the window because there's clouds and there's sun. So it toasts up the actual weather. It should know that where you're going for the rest of your day may require an umbrella in this part of the day, or it may require something else the other part of the day. So how does it be more proactive? How does it take the information it has and actually bring that together? When you're on your way to work, can it actually understand that the mode of transportation you currently take is having an issue, that the bus isn't going to show up when it's supposed to, when it normally does, and actually reroute you? And when it does reroute you, how does it buy the ticket to the subway for you? And when you get downstairs and it's a new environment, how does it guide you through wayfinding to the right track? So you don't have to sit up there and wait and ask questions on, I've never been in this environment before. And then finally, that communications at the end of the day, can we put you into a virtual environment? And can we make that environment where you're talking to your parents or your mom, something more familiar, where the street you grew up on is now in the exact same state as when you grew up and nothing changed, and you take that virtual walk with your parents and you catch up on those memories? Those are the opportunities ahead from a use case perspective. So wanted to just share that with you. And Eric, thanks so much for the time.
That's great, Jefferson, and thanks for that overview. I mean, I think you've really painted a compelling vision for the future, and obviously it raises a lot of questions too about how we get there. I will say the example you gave of one of the challenges of having to be your home CTO, I totally feel that, and I'm also my mom's home's CTO, and that can have its challenges too during a pandemic. So I wanted just to turn to Eric Bruno for a moment. And Eric, maybe I can ask you, I mean, what's Rogers' view of the, connected home, the smart home, and the home of the future? And how is Rogers looking at moving beyond just connectivity?
It's a great question. Thanks, and for having me. Glad to be here. When we look at it from a Rogers perspective, the way Jefferson articulates it, besides, like, if you go through the book, one of the things that was so exciting about it is it's almost sort of paragraph for paragraph the way we think of the world and what we think is coming. With one notable exception, the robot arm that makes you breakfast and gets you dressed, I found creepy and off-putting. But other than that, we're aligned, and we're moving down that path right now. And actually, COVID accelerated that, because literally we went from 72 hours where, our standard was, oh, you want a new service? Well, let's send you the tech that comes to your home, right? Within 72 hours, we went from 95% of our installations being driven by a tech to 95% of them not being driven by a tech. And part of that, we were fortunate in that our next generation platform is all IP and it's driven by Wi-Fi, and you can set it up. So we started doing things like just the tech would drop it off and stand outside while the person set it up, which was great for about a week. But then we moved to, there's a concept that's talked about do it with me, right? So now our care centers and our techs, and we make available to our customers a video application called Blitz. Think of it FaceTime for customer service. Right now, we don't have to send a tech to your house. We can courier you the equipment, and if you got a question, you download the app, which is still there. But then you've got a live video conference with somebody that can walk you through the setup, or show me what you're seeing on your TV. Show me what you're looking at. So we're beginning to drive towards that right now. We do the same thing. We've got a tremendous amount of data. We know what the Wi-Fi looks like in your house, right? We know what the connection looks like, and it's pretty funny. We hire a lot of really smart people, And we give them a lot of autonomy, and we give a lot of our technical operations reps. You give them when the customer calls in, you need to decide, do we need to roll a service truck, or which is somebody will come and go inside your house, or do we need to roll a maintenance truck? Somebody's going to go outside your house. And when we left it up to our service reps, and like I said, they're all smarter than me. It's a low bar, but it's true. They'd get it right about 40, 45% of the time, right? Now we started doing is introducing algorithms that, well, let's look at the state of the outside plant. Let's look at what the head end, let's look at what's going on Wi-Fi, and they make a recommendation. And the recommendation is 80% accurate. Right. So now what that allows us to do is deliver a lot better. There's nothing more frustrating. There may be some things that, you have somebody in your home, right? And it's a privilege to be invited into somebody's living room, right? If somebody knocks on the door and says, hey, I'm here from Google, let me in, Canada's a kinder, gentler country, but in the United States, they'd at least get maced. But so we've got the privilege of being able to invite into somebody's house. But if you're there for the love of all things that matter, don't waste somebody's time. Like, the last thing you want is a service tech in your house to say, I've done everything I can, but still doesn't work, right? So we're moving as quickly as we can towards the home of the future. And one of the things that we see, and one of the things we're so excited about, is we see 5G is helping us move that forward and move forward there faster, right? Because one of the things that's always been a challenge, and before I worked at Rogers, I worked at Verizon in the United States, and you may recall Verizon had its massive fiber to the home build out. But you'd always have these weird conversations like, hey, where do you live? I live on Birch Street. I live 1 block away on Maple. It's like, well, I have Fios, which is the fiber product. And maybe I don't. And then when they realized that I worked for Verizon, I'm like, well, why don't we have it? We're just 1 block away. And the answer is, well, you're just 1 block away, and that's where we stopped. Well, why did you stop there? Because that's where we stopped, right? The beautiful thing about 5G is it, to me, is the ultimate and, right? It used to be, well, you can do it if you live in a city, but now you can do it if you live in a rural community, right? It used to be you might be able to do certain things in your home, but you couldn't do them outside of your home. So it's the big and. I can do stuff inside my home and outside of my home. I can do stuff whether I'm sitting on a fiber network, and I can do the same stuff if I'm sitting on a 5G network. So those are the things, quite honestly, that we see. And if 5G and the hyper-connected home don't materialize, a fair amount of our business plans are going to go up in smoke, and nobody likes that. So we are not only driving towards it, but we're counting on it.
That's great. Thanks for that. Obviously at CWTA, we're very interested in wireless, and we focus, not just on Canada. I mean, we do in terms of our core work, but we also try to look at what's going around the world. And it's interesting when you look at different countries, and you look at usage of mobile wireless versus fixed broadband and stuff. A lot of it has to do with, the culture, the history of the development of the industries in those countries. Here in Canada, Canadians, I think, have a great advantage, is that we're excellent at both. And so what is, when we talk about wireless, using mobile wireless, not just when you're on the move, but in the home, what trends, Eric, are you seeing now in the way that individuals are consuming wireless services that lend themselves to, do you believe that they will be using more wireless in the home and not just fixed broadband?
When you look at, I'd say it's two things, right? One, from a 5G standpoint, we do view it as an and, right? So a lot of people, and it's a great debate. Does 5G kill Wi-Fi? Does Wi-Fi 6 eliminate the need for? And the answer is, from a Rogers perspective, we clearly see the need for both. But when you look at the behaviors that we're seeing, there are a couple things, right? There's stuff that now folks traditionally have done in their home that they do anywhere, right? Whether it's listening to music, whether it's video calling, video conferencing, those are a set of use cases which have traditionally been in the home and have been easily taken out of the home. What we see is, as you begin to introduce like Rogers has with Infinite, more unlimited plans, people become less conscious. I think one of the things that a lot of industries have done to their detriment is basically like how many times has somebody turned around the car and the kids, are you on the Wi-Fi? Are you on the Wi-Fi? You better be on the Wi-Fi. You had better be on the Wi-Fi, right? So from our perspective, part of it is just making sure that people feel comfortable in terms of leveraging their data whenever and wherever they are. So that's making sure we've got clear and transparent communications, making sure that folks have options they can choose, unlimited plans as they move. And what we also see is, as you get into 5G, and a lot of the reasons people say, well, this is an enterprise use case first, is because when you think about all the little bits and bobs you can attach to the network, and all the sensors and everything else, you can make that, the density that you can do with 5G is just amazing. You can get so many more sensors on a per square kilometer basis, and they're so much more efficient. Like, one of the reasons a home is a mess, right, is because I've got Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi eats a lot of power. So now I've got devices connected to Z-Wave and to Zigbee, and it becomes really difficult to connect. One of the things we see 5G is sort of the great equalizer, right? You can have all those types of devices, and you can just have them connected to the 5G network, and you can have them connected in your home. So you get much closer to Jefferson's point of, I just set it up and it works, right? And for those of us that are older, we're sort of accustomed to technology that doesn't work. Let me reboot my computer. Let me my printer's not working. Let me connect it to Wi-Fi. When I look at my daughters, they're like, if technology doesn't work, they just don't use it. It's like, this app doesn't work. On to the next. So, I think one of the things that 5G is also going to help in the consumer space is just adoption, because it's simple, and because it's easy, and because I can do the same things inside of my house as I can do outside of my house, and everything follows me. There's no more of this, well, I can do this here, but you can't do it here. It's all and. And by the way, I think some of those experiences are going to be reversed. So, for example, you're at a baseball game, hopefully someday again at the Rogers Center, right? And you're watching the Jays, and because you have a 5G device, you have augmented views. You've got different views from around the stadium. You can see real-time data, exit velocity on one of Vlad Guerrero's towering home runs, or one of his line drives, et cetera. But that experience can also follow you home. Right now, you're not going to have the hot dog necessarily, or the beer, or the ambiance, but those experiences, whether they're whether it's concerts or whether it's sports events, they'll also follow you home. So that in-home, out-of-home line blurs, and people just become accustomed to having that overall and experience.
That's great.
I also think it's interesting what Eric said around sports specifically. Watching the Jays play, it could be the three of us wanting to actually go to a game, but let's say I got sick or I couldn't make it, and both of you guys got to make it to the game. How can we still stay connected during it? There's no lag in a HD video feed. We're actually in almost real time together, and we can actually interact, like Eric said, where I could be at home, but still basically with you guys. We could kind of still see the same views. We could still see the same stats. We could almost make the same fun bets with each other on who's going to get the next beer if this happens, and those things. And it's really difficult to keep that in sync today. If you even just look at kind of the regular broadcast feed versus the HD feed, there's almost a lag there. But if we can eliminate all of that, and now it almost feels like we're all there together, well, you open up a lot of new opportunities.
And it looks like our government is going to be opening up more sports betting in Canada. So it looks like the convergence of 5G and sports betting there will be one. Jefferson, one of the things that stood out to me in your book was, talking about what people think of today as a smart home as mostly automating tasks. So there's some convenience factor to it. And obviously with the pandemic, there was also, the necessity of doing things remote. But what you're talking about in terms of the home of the future is actually not just automating tasks, but improving people's lives. And I'm wondering if you could give us a use case. I mean, one of the use cases that stood out from the book, because I think it's something we will all face in our lives with our parents or ourselves, is helping people stay in their home longer, aging in the home rather than having to go into assisted living. And just if you could paint that picture of what you really think of as the capabilities of 5G to improve lives, not just automate lives.
Yeah, I mean that's a great one, Eric. Like you said at the beginning, that you're also the home CTO for your parents, and that is very true for a lot of us. I would say that that might be the most interesting use case of all, right? That how do we help our parents when potentially they live very far away and we can't reach and help them, but how do we help our own lives where we don't spend most of our time trying to troubleshoot what happened with their inputs on their television, or why their iPad isn't working, or why something else isn't going right. So if you look at kind of what's happening with aging population, people are living longer, and as a result, our healthcare systems are straining because of that. And if you take that forward and we look at what are the opportunities to relieve that pressure, certainly staying at home longer is that opportunity. It's certainly something that most people prefer, but there's gaps in that journey. So the first gap is certainly, are you able to be self-sufficient at home? Are you taking your medication on time? And let's say you took a nap, and do you remember if you did take your medication? Are you able to get the right amount of exercise in, or are you just assuming that that's happening? What does your diet look like? On top of the fact that there's still purpose in advanced age individuals. And actually a lot of the work in Asia that we did is around still wanting to contribute back to society, still wanting to have a purpose, still wanting to wake up and actually have almost like a contribution back to the system and the society and the environment. So when you look at those journeys, as Eric had mentioned, can we converge the actual home and the actual environment of mobility around it? So for example, if our parents, now let's take that use case forward, if we actually don't know if they took their medication and they don't know if they took their medication, is the home able to help you with that? And there's lots of ways to solve this, right? We've solved it through a smart pill bottle as a sensor. We've solved it through video analytics. We've solved it through a lot of different ways. So we don't need to get into the how, but simply put, if we can actually remember that, you can actually offset a lot of different complications. If you take a high blood pressure medication twice because you don't remember it and your blood pressure drops really low, that is a real problem that we talk to lots of consumers about. They accidentally took a nap. They took the medication in the morning. They didn't remember if they took it again. So they did take it again. And it was an ambulance roll, right? It was an ambulance call because their blood pressure dropped so low that it became an issue. So real world problems that we found out from consumers. The next one on number of steps. Are you actually getting activity inside when you're not allowed outside, right? Today, a lot of the sensors that are out there that Eric Bruno mentioned, sitting on a Wi-Fi scenario, they're not necessarily tuned for advanced age people, right? I mean, you can try and count steps, but indoors on a Wi-Fi environment, that may not be as accurate. So can we think about new ways to actually track that, suggest that, and figure that out? And then the last one, wanting a purpose and still being able to contribute to society. Are there ways that we can create this advanced technology and advanced connectivity so that they can still potentially do meaningful contributions back? It doesn't have to be a full-time job, but what are ways that they can still actually contribute back? So, that alone, we find that it's not just the person who's using the service that may pay for it. Eric Smith, you mentioned it. You may pay for it for your parents. And that's an interesting concept of the business model that, let's say my mom may not necessarily think that that's necessary, but you may pay for the peace of mind to make sure that the medication was taken at the right time and not taken twice. So we do see a lot of opportunities around that specific use case.
Exactly. And then I think just to add on that too is that all of those applications, it's not like we're talking about vast streams of data flowing up and down, right? And I think the power of 5G is the reach and the scope. Although 4G may not be enough, 5G certainly is. So it's the ability to take these experiences not just to the homes that happen to be close to cable or close to fiber, but to all the homes, right? It's the ability to ensure that no home and no person gets left behind as we take these really life-changing experiences and begin to deliver them. We can deliver them to everybody in Canada, not just people that happen to be in a certain geography for a certain set of reasons.
Yeah, thanks. And I think another thing that's top of mind to me is security and trust. We see it in the news all the time. People concerned about either data breaches or improper use of data, security hacks, those types of things. And we're putting more and more devices into our homes, and some of them, quite frankly, are from companies you may have never dealt with before, never heard of, no idea what their pedigree and security is. Whereas I think most Canadians understand the communication service providers, the security that they build into their networks, the amounts that they invest in security and data privacy, et cetera. Eric, is that kind of a key theme in terms of your company, your offerings, and sort of maybe a competitive advantage over other sort of platforms and device providers who are trying to get inside the home? Is that something that you focus upon with your relationships with your customers?
So we do, right? And I think what it starts is, first of all, trust has to be earned, right? And the information that we have the privilege of having access to has to be protected rigorously. It has to be managed well, but we do have that infrastructure, right? We have large teams of cybersecurity experts. We have a lot of security built into our network. And from Rogers is an example, but other carriers use similar things. Like we leverage heavily the ecosystem that Comcast has built around X1, right? So we know that if their devices that we provide that are attached to the Wi-Fi that we provide, we know that they're secure and that they're safe. And we do see that as an advantage. But by the same token, our customers also demand choice and they demand flexibility. And that's something we've got to be cognizant of as well. So, in the conversations we're having, and it's certainly in the platform we're bringing to market, as are others, different platforms, but similar things, it's the works with capability, right? It's the ability to go to the store, get the device of your choice, or at least get devices other than ones that you can only get from Rogers. I think, it'd be naive to think that we can come to the market with a walled garden and that's it. Now, will we come to the market with a curated solution? Yes, but we've got to respect the sort of customer demand for choice. So what we'll also do is work with a lot of different partners and make sure that it's also a seamless and easy experience. If it's a Lutron Lite, or it's some type of different smart sensor or another different type of smart thermostat, doesn't have to be one that we sell, but you bring it in and it works. And as far as we can extend our security and protection, we should, and also give our customers the tools to be able to manage some of that on their own. So we do see ourselves as having an advantage from the standpoint that we can bring end-to-end security. We also recognize that that's a privilege that we have to have the responsibility of executing against. And the other piece is, let's also be cognizant of the fact that customers are going to want other choices. And even if Comcast comes forward and says, like, here's a video doorbell that works seamlessly, people may not choose that. And we've got to make it easy for everybody. Now, maybe it's easiest and most secure if it's in sort of our curated platform, but everything we touch needs to be easy and everything we touch needs to be secure.
Thanks. We have a question, and I think I'll pose it to you, Jefferson. I think you touched on it a bit. I think Eric did as well. But the question is really, why can't all of this that you're talking about just be provided over Wi-Fi? And I know you touch upon that in your book a bit in terms of some of the limitations of Wi-Fi. I wonder if you could just expand upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, as Eric just mentioned, it's definitely can be an and. It's complementary. It doesn't need to be kind of a replace, as he had mentioned, but there's certain things that innately a cellular network can do differently than a Wi-Fi network. So part one is just reliability. So a Wi-Fi network is unlicensed spectrum. It's generally a best effort network, whereas a 5G on a cellular network is licensed spectrum. it is monitored, it is incredibly reliable. So from a reliability standpoint, in that last use case we talked about with aging in place, those are more, we call them just mission critical use cases, knowing that if you did take your medication or not. So making sure that those are on the right networks is incredibly important when you have lives on the line to an extent. And then when you think about number of devices connected, that's another one that Eric Bruno had mentioned. When you think about Wi-Fi, there's a lot of interference. There's a certain number of channels, but in a dense city environment, if you've got an apartment and all those apartments have several different Wi-Fi sensors connected to it, even today, it's hard to get a connection because there's a lot of interference. There's a lot of noise in the system. You don't have that with a cellular network, as Eric talked about. Probably even today, a 4G network, it's going to be 10 times more capable of handling number of devices in a 5G world. So it's about 100,000 devices per square kilometer. In a 4G world, it's 1 million devices per square kilometer on average in a 5G world. So you don't have those interference issues. And then from a security standpoint is another big area to think about. When you look at Wi-Fi, some people protect their networks, some people don't. From a cellular perspective, it's encrypted. There's a lot more stake in a security standpoint. So then it goes back to kind of what you guys just did discuss, which is really trust. That's incredibly, as Eric had mentioned, it takes a long time to earn and just an instant to lose. So the ability to build up that trust, communication service providers have a perishable moment to take advantage of that. If you think about during the pandemic, Rogers, a lot of companies did a great job, keeping the lights on, even if people weren't paying their bills, relieving some of the data caps, even though those were written into the contracts. And the CSPs earned an incredible amount of trust through that. By earning that, is there an opportunity to now springboard that into a data conversation, into moments that matter, into the home? And that's kind of the perishable moment that trust is not going to last forever, right? So now is the best moment we see to kind of capitalize on that and making sure that, as Eric Bruno mentioned, there's choice for the consumer because that's what they want and desire, but there's a sense of trust that when you deal with a Rogers, that you feel much more confident that your data isn't getting used in a certain way, or that data privacy isn't getting abused in a certain way. So those are the really incredible moments that we have the opportunity to touch on. So again, summarizing, reliability, security, and just kind of, number of devices connected are big differences between cellular and Wi-Fi.
Thanks for that explanation. That's great. Eric, one thing I'm curious about as well is, obviously we're in a very dynamic industry and it's changing all the time. And that means that the carriers have to change all the time. And we're talking about, a real ecosystem here that communication service providers hope to be, a real a hub of that ecosystem, an orchestrator of that ecosystem. How have things changed for a company like Rogers in terms of the putting together these partnerships? I assume, there's some areas you kind of, use cases you want to, quote unquote, own. There's some you want to kind of white label, some you want to partner with, some you want to support. Is this a whole new sort of skill set that your organization has to develop and build to be able to insert yourself as that orchestrator of the ecosystem?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, we do. And it's interesting too, because, and I think one of the first steps for almost every communication service provider on the planet is you really do have to learn, to a certain extent, humility, right? Because if you take the case of Rogers, right, we are a fantastic company, one of the largest communications providers in Canada. But when you start looking at the scope of the ecosystems that Jefferson is talking about, they're global, right? And so the first thing you have to accept is our ability as even a big company in a fairly large country, I'm dealing with Apple and Google and Samsung and Amazon, right? I mean, when you look at the size of some of these ecosystems, that the first thing you have to understand is we may not be in control. Not that we ever were, but we sure like to think it. And I think what some of this forces is just to think on a more global scale. Who are your global partners? And it also makes you think about where is the value that we as a communication service provider can bring. And a lot of it's, to the point Jefferson's made early, on the service, right? To make it easy, to make it simple, to curate it, right? There are a lot of folks that like to do it yourself, and we need to be prepared to support them. But there are an equal number of folks that want things done for them. So, our ability to, to be proactive, like for an example, if you're on Rogers Ignite TV, then you call into our customer service, or for whatever reason with a question, we might mention casually, hey, by the way, the remote on your battery, the battery on your remote is low. There's just a lot of information and service that we can bring that's proactive, not reactive, that really makes customers enjoy the experience that we're providing. So I think the first thing it does as a CSP is it forces you to say, where can I bring value? I can't out Google or out Apple, but where are the places that we can focus, right? And it's in customer service, it's in security, it's in privacy. These are the things that we can bring in a way that means something to people and create value. Sure, you know what? If all you want is the best possible pipe in the world, and you're going to integrate your entire house, knock yourselves out, and we'll make sure that whether you're connecting via fixed wireless access or fiber or DOCSIS, it's going to be the best connection that you ever had. And if you have to call us, we're going to know exactly what's going on, right? If we see issues, maybe we'll reach out to you first. These are all things that happen. And by the way, if you want us to come one step further or two steps further, we will. And the more you let us do for you, the easier it becomes. So that's really it focuses any CSP to say, where can we add value in the ecosystem? And then it also says, and then you need to go make some choices on partnerships, because you can't be partnered with everybody. So if we've made a choice, right? We want to participate in from a connected home standpoint, in the X1 ecosystem, right? On the wireless side, we chose a partner who's Ericsson, right? So you pick your partners wisely, and then you really focus on where you can add value on top of what your partner brings as it relates to what your customers need.
Jefferson, do you have anything to add to that, just from what you're seeing with other CSPs around the world? Is it the same type of focus, or is there some nuances, differences between countries and carriers?
No, I think the important kind of points that we just heard are that focus is required, right? That because you look at something as broad as a new technology in cellular, you can solve a lot of different things, but what is the right areas to focus on? And what are your control points? If you guys recall that honeycomb slide, we talked about what are the areas you can affect and what are the control points to actually double down on. And then the word Eric Bruno just mentioned, partnerships. It's incredibly important to figure out how to structure those partnerships. So there is the actual equipment providers and the actual ecosystem providers to actually figure out as partners, but there's also how do we bring developers into this? If you look at kind of what Wi-Fi has become, it's incredibly available in terms of number of devices, but it's also pretty prevalent in terms of developers because it's cheap, it's easy to get access to, it's available to the developer community, and it's pretty standardized. So as a result, you've got a lot of momentum around people building on top of it. But if you look at cellular, we've always had someone needs to give you like a SIM card, and then you have to be able to activate and provision it, and then you're allowed to develop on it. So how do we actually offer that or open that up so that you can gain more developers or more solution providers or more partners to be able to build on top of a platform? So I think those are some of the things we're seeing globally that a lot of clients are figuring out. As Eric had just mentioned, hey, from a network equipment provider, Ericsson, and from this provider, but also they're thinking about how do we bet on the right developer ecosystems? How do we actually incent those developer ecosystems to continue to build on top of? And that's actually, it's easy to say, it's really hard to, one, attract them, to onboard them easily, three, make it easy access to the actual network itself, and then four, create a business model so that everybody wants to actually work together on it. So a lot of times people just think about it as, hey, if I just open up the network, they'll naturally just come on board. Eric made the really, really good point that the scale of a communication service provider is very different than the scale of an internet provider, right? They're in the hundreds of millions, right? And global. A CSP is considered regional. It's country-based to an extent. So how do we double down on the control points? How do we attract the best developers and solution providers? How do we incent them and put a business model together? And then how do we figure out the operating model? It's much more than just a technology opening up an API. It's almost that overall thinking, that overall transformation that we've been working with clients on, which is operating model, business model, plus kind of the tech platform availability.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, we're near the end of our time, and I before I turn it back to Rob Giz, Eric, for you, I think one of the questions we sometimes get when we talk about 5G as an industry association is, well, this is all great, this is future oriented, etc. But right now we have, while the vast majority of Canadians have access to the internet, to connectivity, there are still those who are not connected. And what is the industry? What are companies like Rogers doing to remedy that? And I'm just wondering if you could just touch upon that for a moment.
Well, sure. I think one of it is there's what are we doing, and there's what's going on overall, right? The Canadian government at both the federal and provincial levels is also stepping in a big way, right? And so one of the things that I can point to from a Rogers perspective is we're participating in all of those public-private partnerships, right? You would have seen the announcement that we were the winning bidder for the Eastern Ontario Regional Network. We're leaning hard into, we've partnered with SWIFT, we're leaning hard into UBF, we've partnered with the province of BC, right? So one of the things we're doing is we are leaning into the public-private partnerships that drive service expansion, and we're leaning into 5G, right? Because that technology gives you great coverage and it gives you great depth. And those two things, those public-private partnerships are key. We want to do more, we want to go faster. And we're going to continue to leverage the benefits that 5G brings to ensure that we don't leave any homes behind, right? And that's the benefit, right? You can only bring fiber to so many places. You can only bring cable to so many places. But you can bring 5G everywhere, and that really is the focus. It's leaning into those public-private partnerships, and it's also doing everything on our part to invest in the types of technology that give us the coverage, and to make sure that when we're participating in those public-private partnerships, that we don't leave homes behind, right? That we get everybody covered. Not everybody may have fiber, but everybody's going to have a good connection.
Yeah, no, and at CWTA, we're very excited about seeing, it seems almost, well, it's probably weekly, but sometimes it seems daily, announcements of our members, such as Rogers and our other members, participating in those public-private partnerships. So that's all the time we have for now. I want to thank you, Jeff, for a great discussion. And I'd just like to turn it back to our president, Rob Giz, for just some final remarks.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric, for moderating that. And thanks to Eric and Jefferson for an exciting discussion that's really looking at the future and how we can improve people's lives and improve our country. When I think of probably our three biggest challenges that we're facing right now as a country, it's coming out of the COVID world and how we're going to have economic growth. It's the environmental footprint that we're going to leave the next generation. It's also about healthcare costs that are growing because of an aging population. And the answer to all three of those is 5G. 5G is going to help, improve all those things. And as we just heard there at the end from Eric, it's also going to help connect Canadians. It's going to, you can bring 5G everywhere. So I think today's discussion was fantastic. I'm excited about 5G. I want to thank our panelists. We're looking forward to our next event such as this, our next virtual event. It's going to take place on May 27th at noon Eastern. We're going to have some great speakers where we're going to be talking about 5G and the automotive industry. So driverless cars will probably be a topic, and we're looking forward to that. So I want to thank everyone for coming out today. Please check us out on Twitter at CWTA Wireless to get all the updates on our next virtual conference. And thank you so much for attending today. Enjoy your day.